Hello everyone and welcome to Tuesday Night Legacy presented by Spellhold Games. My name is Eugene and this is round 2 from March 29th. On the left we have Alex playing an Enchantress deck. It's a new deck for the channel. Alex, well known for playing his prison decks. This is a deck that likes to set up a draw engine early in the game and then just continue to play cards that kind of shut the opponent out of interacting with him until he finally has so much card advantage that he ends the game with 1 to 2 distinct cards. And then we have Fred on the right playing his 4-color control list, which is going to try and do the exact opposite, constantly denying anything and everything that his opponent wants to do, and then win with his own 1 to 2 win conditions. So, prison versus control. Let's get right into it. Here we go. Starting on the left, we have Alex playing his Windswept Heath, passing the turn. Not too much to do for Enchantress on the very first turn. It's not really trying to win through any kind of combo. Both of these decks are going to be taking their time during this game. We do see him go for a basic forest here. Now, almost all of Alex's cards in his deck are permanents. Everything that's going to be interacting is going to have an enter the battlefield effect or a static effect of some kind. He actually plays his first draw engine of the turn, Argothian Enchantress. Now, this card has Shroud, so it can't be targeted, and every time that Alex casts an enchantment spell, he gets to draw another card. So we see that first enchantment coming down. We're going to be highlighting a lot of Alex's cards as they are not normally seen as staples except for this specific deck. Sterling Grove is going to give Shroud to every other enchantment. So it doesn't give Shroud to itself, but if you do have 2 Sterling Groves in play, then all of your enchantments have Shroud. Now, this is quite the card that Fred basically either had in his hand or found with that brainstorm. He set himself up and then had the Miracle Terminus, being able to deal with that shrouded creature by putting it down on the bottom of Alex's library. Although Alex did have another draw engine, this one does technically have Shroud right now since the Sterling Grove is giving it the Shroud, but it's an enchantment itself, and now this one actually gains him life and draws a card every time that he casts an enchantment spell. So trying to deal with all of these different draw engines, if he had both of those in play, every time that he would cast an enchantment, he'd draw 2 cards. So Enchantress is really good at ramping up and just having a ton of card advantage. We see a prismatic ending being fired off here, using the activated ability on Sterling Grove to be able to go and get any enchantment from his deck and put it on top of his library. I think Alex sees the writing on the wall here, since there's 2 more mana open on Fred's side. He's going to make sure that he does have a draw engine, even though the Sithis is legendary. Looking at his hand, he cannot go and get the Argothian Enchantress, as it is just a creature, it's not an enchantment, whereas Sithis is an enchantment. So he goes and gets a Sithis, puts it on top, because he knows that here goes Swords to Plowshares, there goes Sithis, setting himself up for making sure that he always is able to draw more and more cards. So we see that Sithis come down that he just put on top, passes the turn. So although Fred doesn't have any meaningful interaction as far as life loss for his opponent, he is taking care of basically everything on Alex's side, even though they are extremely difficult permanents to deal with. We see a Mystic Sanctuary come down, and since there are 3 islands in play, he was able to return Terminus to the top of his deck and then miracle that in to get rid of Sithis right to the bottom. We see an Uro being cast. So this is one of Fred's win conditions. Uro just kind of thrown in there because it's just so good at creating advantage and then eventually end game being a big 6/6 that constantly generates you more advantage that you can cast from the graveyard. Back to Alex. It looks like he's starting to run out of a little bit of steam. I mean, we've seen him go through 3 card engines and, giving everything Shroud. Still has 4 cards in hand, has that cast out, which can get rid of this Uro here. In fact, he's actually going to fire it off right now. This is one of the ways to deal with problematic permanents in Alex's deck. A flash enchantment that can basically exile any non-land permanent. And if he really doesn't want it, he can always cycle it. But it being an enchantment is also extremely useful. See another Uro go to the grave here. Fetching up a basic, I believe, is what happened there. All right. Drawing for turn. We see an abundant growth. So this is just an enchantment that basically draws a card, but now that land can tap for any color, which is great. And he does find one of his... Ooh, Argothian Enchantress getting Force of Willed there. So can still be countered before it's in play. Pitching a Force of Will for the Force of Will, though. Fred kind of running out of cards. Both of these players just using all sorts of their resources to kind of keep the other player off of what they want to do. But the more that Fred commits to the board, or rather the more that Alex commits to the board, the more that Fred has to answer these things, and they're just both running out of cards. So it's kind of an attrition war at this point of who can create more card advantage. So Expressive Iteration is definitely going to help Fred pull ahead of Alex here, being able to see 3 cards and have access to 2 of them. Casting the Murktide Regent. So Murktide Regent, a really good way at ending the game. Exiling, it looks like 3 sorceries in instance. So flying 6/6 can end the game in 3 turns. It is going to get On Thin Iced, though. Another enchantment that can remove a creature from play, kind of like a Oblivion Ring, but it sits on a snow basic. Now, the only thing here is it's kind of a dangerous way to answer the Murktide Regent, since we know that Fred runs so many prismatic endings. And there it is, the prismatic ending he found off of, I believe, either that Ponder or that Expressive. We see a Sylvan Library come down, which is going to be a huge boon to Fred, as he can pay tons of life to draw extra cards. He is at 25 right now, so being ahead of the game is going to be really good for him. Can just pay 8 life to draw all the cards. I didn't highlight that card, but basically it was a pay 1, find 2 enchantments, I believe. Off the top, like 5 or 6 cards, or maybe just 1 enchantment. It was definitely going to get Alex back, at least a chance back in, with the Sithis in play, but the Force of Negation said no to that. Fred down to 1 card here, but he does have his 3/3 Murktide Regent. He is casting Uro from the grave. So now, oh, that's right, with that static ability on the Murktide, whenever a card leaves or whenever an instant or sorcery leaves the graveyard, it gets counters, not just when it comes into play. So we're seeing a lot of advantage here. Jace the Mind Sculptor coming down, Fate sealing Alex. Didn't like the top of that card, so there's the writing on the wall here is pretty deep, but Alex is still going to try. Drew into an On Thin Ice, got to draw an extra card off of Sithis, so if he does draw an enchantment next turn, he's not completely out of the game yet. But we do see Fred having that hand selection, and then getting the Misty Rainforest, so whatever cards he had on top of his deck are now gone. He gets to see a fresh 3 next turn with that library. Casting another Uro just to draw an extra card, gain some life, and play a land. I think this is a Jace Brainstorm activation here. Jace the Mind Sculptor just doing anything and everything that you'd ever want a blue Planeswalker to do, especially when you're ahead and they can't deal with that Planeswalker. He can just dig you out of almost any problematic situation. See another attack with Uro, so that's 2 Uro activations this game, or this turn, and a Brainstorm, and a Sylvan Library activation. That's just so many cards, even though we do see this Miri's Guile come down, which is going to help Alex see 3 cards at the top of his deck. It's not quite a scry, but he does get to at least set up his draws a little bit. It might not be enough. We're seeing a couple enchantments come down here, drawing some extra cards. Argothian Enchantress helping him. Did draw into that cast out, which looks like he's just going to go for right now and try and get rid of that Uro. Oh, it might be for the Jace, not entirely certain. Getting the Enchantress trigger before the Enter the Battlefield trigger. And it looks like Fred's not going to let it happen. Force of Will there. Does get to draw that extra card. And it's another one cast enchantment, which draws a card and then draws a card again for Argo the Enchantress. So that was a pretty good one to draw, but it doesn't look like he drew into any action there. Was that another ending? Oh, it was a Boseiju discard. So that destroyed the On Thin Ice, which brought back the Murktide Regent. There is another Uro in the grave, so if Fred feels like it, he can cast that Uro. And that might be more damage. I'm not sure, though. I don't think it can be. We see Narset come down. This is going to completely stop Alex's draw engine here, as he can't draw more than one card a turn now. So unless Alex basically draws a cast out right now that can deal with this Narset, he just doesn't really have a chance. Just way too many problematic permanents to deal with. This is 9 damage presenting on the board. Technically, Alex can block with his Argo the Enchantress, so he's not quite dead yet. We're going to see a Life from the Loam activation. That's going to be 3 lands out of the grave. But they are not instants and sorceries, so no counters for Murktide Regent. But he brought back the Boseiju so he could blow up the Cast Out or the Miri's Guile or any number of enchantments that Fred wants to get rid of. We see the Engineered Explosives coming down on 2. That's going to be able to deal with Argo the Enchantress. Oh, he has a Caracas in play too. So that's going to return the Uro to hand. If Fred does blow up this Engineered Explosives, he will lose access to a Sylvan Library. But at this point, it might not matter to him. Yep, there we go. This is basically going to stop Alex from being able to draw extra cards. We do see the activation of that sorcery, which is going to go and get him a Destiny Spinner. This is one of Alex's win conditions. I think he plays it here. So we're going to see a Sterling Grove come down. And now we're going to see a Destiny Spinner. So this is an enchantment creature. When he pays 4, he can basically create a huge XX elemental where it's however many enchantments you control, and that can come across and attack for a whole bunch. So if he did that right now, which I think he can, it would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8. So the Murktide getting a counter for the Life from the Loam leaving the graveyard and going back to his hand for the Dredge. Force a negation to hand. Another Brainstorm. I think that Force a negation was off of the Narset activation. So Narset down to 1 now. Yeah, the Uro coming back, it's just going to be too much. So Alex packs it in and we're going to game 2. Alex getting the start here. Let's see here. Yeah. All right, starting out with a Paladin class. So this is one of the newer cards. This is from the D&D set. Basically says that during your turn, you get a Thalia attacks for your opponents, and then creatures get +1/+1 if you pump it up. And then the last one, which is another part of Alex's win condition, is it gives double strike and kind of like Exalted to one creature specifically for each attacking creature. So if you can load that up on one of your big Destiny Spinner lands, then you can be attacking for a whole bunch. Pretty good start for Alex here with the Sterling Grove, Paladin class, and Sithis. So he's got a little bit of his engine started. Looks like, oh, it was a Wasteland for the Savannah there. So it just has 2 basics now. Going to do the Abundant Growth, draw a card. Now that white mana can tap for anything. Drawing extra cards for playing all these enchantments. Always good to see all of that advantage. And just get in for a little bit of beats. When the field is clear, there's no reason not to. We see an Expressive Iteration come down, trying to generate a little bit more advantage for Fred. Looks like he does have a Prismatic Ending in hand. Gonna have to target the Sterling Grove to start, though, so he goes ahead and passes it back. having this Miri's Guile down super early for Alex is a really strong start, as he gets to have a ton of advantage of seeing which cards and kind of setting up these plays with this draw engine, making sure that enchantment comes down after enchantment and just loops and gets his board just silly full of enchantments. And that second Sterling Grove come down is super important, so now he's basically protected against any of these targeted removal spells. Fred's going to need specifically, I think, an Engineered Explosives to deal with those Sterling Groves, as long as Alex doesn't blow one of them up to go and search for an enchantment. Terminus would deal with the Sithis, but none of these other enchantments. So we will see what Fred has to deal with this. A Jace the Mind Sculptor is a good start. Getting to see a lot of extra cards. Passing it back. Miri's Guile trigger. I think Alex wants to make sure that he's making his land drops as well. He has a lot of permanents, but not a ton of land. He's fetching up more forests. I'm not sure if he wants access to white mana. This is a wild growth. It's basically just going to make that forest tap for two green instead of just 1 green. So it's a little bit of mana ramp there. We see a cast out. I think he can cast it, but more than likely, Fred's got a whole hand of disruption. So instead, he decides to spend the turn leveling up that Paladin class to level 2 and attacking Jace, bringing him down to 1. But Fred did have the Terminus on his next turn. So Sithis is gone. So Alex is going to need some meaningful way of interacting. Either we know he has the cast out, but it might catch a Force of Will. But he needs some meaningful creature to be able to interact with Jace here, or all of these enchantments aren't going to do a whole lot. Well, there's the Engineered Explosives on 2, so not an awesome situation. Alex kind of deciding he doesn't have that draw engine anymore. It looks like he's got at least 2 cast outs in his hand. But even if he fires off the cast out to try and get rid of the Engineered Explosives, Fred can blow it up in response, kept the mana open just to make sure. So he's counting up, trying to decide what to keep on top with the Miri's Guile triggers. And before even draw step, Fred decides to blow up the Engineered Explosives just in case. And that means that whatever was on top of the library was more important than any of these Sterling Grove triggers that Alex could have used in response. So we have a Gloom Shrieker. This is a newer card as well. This is actually from the new Kamigawa set that is going to get any permanent card back to hand. And it's also an enchantment, so I think he picked up one of the Sterling Groves. Yeah. Right back to play, protecting his enchantments. So Gloom Shrieker being an enchantment itself is definitely a meaningful way to interact with Jace the Mind Sculptor. And it having Shroud is also very useful, and gets +1/+1 from the Paladin class. So we see the Prismatic Ending coming for the Sterling Grove. Going to go and get some enchantment, put it on top of the deck. Probably going to be Sithis here. I don't know. I mean, he might go for another Gloom Shrieker, or maybe even, yeah, Rest in Peace could be pretty good here. It's too bad that he doesn't have a way. Well, he might be able to deal with Jace, but there's a lot of cards in hand. Looks like Fred's got a Monastery Mentor there. That's going to be another one of his win conditions. Since Fred casts so many non-creature spells, Monastery Mentor is a fantastic way to kind of close out the game. You just stick the Mentor for 3, and then removal spells and cantrips is going to be all these 1/1 monks, and you just go super wide on your opponent. And you can always protect it with all of your counter spells. So seems like an auto include in a deck like Fred's. Going to go and get a... Oh, it's going to be the Mystic Sanctuary, which is technically an island. Has the type island on it. I think... Oh, I'm not... I thought he would have put something on top of his deck, but I guess he didn't. Unless it was the Prismatic Ending. Ooh, that's going to get rid of the Paladin class, which is going to allow Fred to at least cast Force of Will on Alex's turn now that he doesn't have that one-sided Thalia attacks. So this Gloom Shrieker is kind of stonewalled by the Mentor and its Monk at this point. So it looks like he's got another Paladin class in hand. Oh no, that might be a cast out. Okay, so we're going to see Destiny Spinner here. Oh, for those that would like to know, this is Monastery Mentor. So Destiny Spinner coming down on Alex's side. He is going to get that Force of Will. Tapping a couple more. Going to cast out that Monastery Mentor. And it looks like blocking with 2 monks, getting rid of the 2/2 instead of the 1/1. And back to Fred. Fred looking like he's digging himself out of a tough situation here. Alex does have a few cards in hand. Ooh, another ending. And Murktide Regent. So that's going to be pretty tough. He's going to exile 4 instants and sorceries. He's got that 7/7. And a cross for 2 there. Looks like another Miri's Guile. Miri's Guile would trigger twice, but without any meaningful way to draw cards at instant speed, it's not particularly useful. We do see an Argothian Enchantress there. So more cards to be drawn. Paladin class coming back down. Looking at the top 4, grabbing an enchantment out of it. Looks like 2 Sithis. But I guess those aren't the cards that Alex wants to see, so he goes ahead and packs it up. So that is the end of our round 2. Thanks again for joining us for this round 2. I hope you enjoyed the prison versus control lists. Just want to let you know, if you guys are interested, if you all are interested in the deck list, they're actually found in the description of this video, as well as a Discord invite to Spellhold Games if you guys are local and want to know a little bit more about the store. Join us for round 3. It's going to actually be Jack coming back from round 1, playing Storm versus Fred on his 4-color control list. Join us then.